Hi, my name is James, known in-game as Wolfie. I'm going to be discussing whether Battlefield 1 can be a good competitive game. There has been some discussion on this topic, a good article posted by Red Bull eSports and some other videos on YouTube. However, I want to bring in a slightly different perspective, that from someone who has actually played at the top level of competitive Battlefield. Before I get into the main issues, I'm going to quickly introduce myself and I will also try to quickly summarize what the previous state of the competitive scene in Battlefield was like. I have played this game franchise since Battlefield 2. I started playing competitively on the old clan-based system with Battlefield 2142. It wasn't until Battlefield 3 that I started to play on the Electronic Sports League. There I tried 5-on-5 Infantry Conquest, 8-on-8 with Vehicles Conquest, and 4-on-4 Squad Rush. I gradually worked my way up until I found the right team for 5-on-5 Infantry. With the release of Battlefield 4 and the announcement of the ESL ONE Majors, we got sponsored by Meet Your Makers, and from there I attended DreamHack Winter in Sweden and several ESL ONE finals in Germany, where we managed to win the first ever Battlefield ESL ONE final. For the full list of Battlefield competitive achievements, there is a link in the description. Battlefield has always had a small competitive community since Battlefield 1942, before eSports really got big. Some large and notable organizations such as Dignitas were born from Battlefield 1942, a team which has now grown to signing business deals with the Philadelphia 76ers. This pattern of a relatively small and niche competitive community followed until the release of Battlefield 4 when DICE partnered with ESL to bring us the seasonal ESL ONE Majors. Even then it wasn't ever that big, although this was arguably their attempt to get into the quickly growing esports scene. So, can Battlefield 1 actually work competitively? Can it even be a big esport? I respect DICE for taking a leap of faith into esports with Battlefield 4. However, due to the initial stumble of bugs, glitches, crashes, and in general, the game itself, it drove away a lot of potential players and spectators. However much I enjoyed my experience playing with the team, being sponsored and attending LANs, I really do not believe there is much of a future in this game for esports. It's really been tried and tested. There will always be a competitive community willing to team up and battle just for fun without care for prize money or fame. I respect them for doing so and all power to them. Instead, I'm mostly focused on the major issues which the game has that stop Battlefield 1 from being appropriate for competitive gameplay. If DICE is going to provide support, as rumors suggest, this will hopefully provide them some constructive feedback into what needs to be changed to increase the competitive player base, or, as other rumors suggest, a future game in their franchise that may have esports support. The obvious first problem is which game mode is best suited for competitive gameplay. In Battlefield 3, players enjoyed Infantry Conquest 5-on-5, Conquest with Vehicles 8-on-8, and Infantry Rush 4-on-4. The maps worked relatively well for these game modes, they were not too large nor too small. Maps made it relatively straightforward to make callouts and interesting strategies. Teams would actually utilize smoke, squad beacons, and other tools at their disposal. Playing the game felt more tactical and structured. In Battlefield 4 we expected to play the same game modes, but we were forced to play Domination. According to DICE, this was to increase the pace of the game. Unfortunately, this resulted in semi-chaotic gameplay. Many fights ended up in grenade spamming fest and players throwing themselves at each other. The spawn system in Domination was also not suited for competitive play. To spectator and players it felt random, even though with experience you were able to predict where the enemy would spawn based on your team's positions. But at times you'd get that infamous backspawn right behind the enemy team whilst the rest of your team spawned on the other side of the map. So it wasn't much of a surprise that people thought it was random. For esports, random is not what you want. However, in Conquest, players spawn on the flags, which meant teams could learn the spawn rotations for each flag and literally spawn kill the enemy as they were trying to capture it. This was one of the many small details that really made the top teams in Battlefield 3 shine above the rest. Similar things were seen in Rush 4-on-4. The top teams could use smoke, time pushes, learn where the enemy spawned, and control the map and flow of the game. In Domination, a lot of the time it really felt like who had more fragging power would win, and a lot of engagements looked and felt like a total mess. Hardly anyone used smokes, and many of the gadgets were banned due to being overpowered or skillless. In Battlefield 1 there has only been rumors of a competitive game mode, so what game mode would actually work? There are current discussions on the ESL forums about this, and even there no one really knows, which is, well, not a good sign. The general consensus is that players would like a rush mode or a mixed game mode like in Call of Duty. To the people who actually suggested Domination, I ask, what drugs are you on? We spent a lot of time complaining about it in Battlefield 4 until the game mode was eventually switched to Obliteration. Now you actually want to bring it back? Are you serious? War Pigeon seems out of the question, as Krypton and Z put it nicely. It's basically team deathmatch with a pigeon on it and a lot of randomness. Again, randomness is not what we want for competitive gameplay, and who the hell wants to play or watch team deathmatch? No one. There's no actual objective other than killing each other. It's boring to watch. Conquest would be great, but unfortunately the maps just don't work for it, as they are designed for large-scale 64-player battles, which is just too large and dynamic for the much smaller amount of people in an official match. This leaves us with the last game mode, the one that's new to the Battlefield franchise, Operations. This would actually seem like a decent idea for a competitive game. It's like Rush, there are two clear objectives and one team has to attack while the other defends. Teams could learn the spawns, formulate defensive and offensive strategies. There's a lot more depth into these two game modes in comparison to the others. However, it's difficult to say what would actually work and not. All I can do is make educated guesses with what is currently available in the game and from past personal experience. We don't really know how much access we will have with private servers, and whether the maps would even work with such a small amount of players. The second main issue in Battlefield 1 is the map design. It is clearly made for large-scale battles, 40 plus players with vehicles for full immersion, which of course is one of DICE's main marketing points. There does not really seem to be any structure to the maps, and they seem to be all based on real-world locations. Competitively speaking, the maps need to be created and designed for competition to work properly. A good example of this is in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, where the maps are all based on a standard blueprint. If you look at the map at its core, they are all very similar to one another. Two bomb sites, one larger than the other. The smaller of the two generally has a choke point entrance, whilst the larger one tends to have 2 or 3 ways to enter. The maps are designed around the competitive game mode. This enables players to formulate both offensive and defensive strategies while minimizing randomness, allowing an enjoyable competitive and relatively balanced gameplay for both the players and the spectators. In Battlefield, the maps are designed to be flexible so they can accommodate for different game modes and to show off levolution, dynamic weather effects, and other large in-game events that make Battlefield unique. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against any of this and I respect them for trying to push the boundaries of what we can expect from a game. I fully understand how complicated and difficult creating a game of this magnitude is. However, in terms of competitive gameplay alone, the maps are clearly not designed for it, and DICE never claimed they would, so there's no real surprise as to why it won't work properly. A good example would be Suez Canals. There are so many buildings on this map that all have several windows, entrances, and they all look the same. Whilst the flag capture zones are mostly outside, how is any team supposed to make proper callouts for this? The enemies could be in any houses peeking from any window. It's adding too much unpredictability. A solution implemented by teams to counter this situation was to literally blow up the buildings with RPGs. This adds another problem. We're changing the environment, which is great for casual play and what Battlefield is all about, but for competitive, it just adds more uncertainty. I'm not going to go into every detail of every map. I could probably write an entire book on the things that don't make it compatible. I just hope you understand my point here. The maps are not designed for it. There are too many angles to cover, variations in lighting, foliage, levolution, etc, etc. This all makes for a great immersive experience, but it makes a poor competitive experience which drives teams away. Aside from the game mode and map design issues, another major problem hindering competitive play are certain game mechanics that I believe even in the normal casual player could do without, or at least be improved on. These include the hit registration, melee mechanics, wall vaulting, and lastly the invisible walls. Hit registration refers to how the server and client detects bullet impacts. Compared to other games, the Battlefield franchise is weak in this area. With Battlefield 3 and 4, they moved the hit detection from server-sided to client-sided, and in combination with the low tick rate of 15 Hz, this refers to how often the server updates information, and the fact that every bullet shot is its own game object meant that it got even worse. The following recording was taken by my teammates after the Battlefield 4 full release, showcasing how frustrating it could get.
3, 2, 1. What? No. 3, 2, 1. What? No.
As you can clearly see, I kill my teammate literally 2 seconds after I shoot my weapon. Even from my own perspective, I could clearly see he died after he was safely behind cover. It wasn't only the competitive players. but also the casual community that was experiencing constant death behind cover or not being able to kill certain enemies. Over time, DICE addressed this issue by releasing tweaks to the hit registration and eventually increasing the server tick rate from 15Hz to a maximum of 144Hz. It definitely felt better, but of course never as good as other first-person shooter games. With Battlefield 1 they decided to keep the servers at 60Hz, and with other possible tweaks they may have done, I personally feel that the hit registration is a lot better in comparison. So some progress has been made. The next game mechanic that will hinder the enjoyment of competitive play is how certain aspects of the bayonet charge work. Killing an enemy whilst they're trying to charge you is not that big of a problem, as you can hear them screaming their lungs out and their footsteps as they run towards you. The problem is the amount of times that somehow, to my complete surprise, the enemy has suddenly warped through the edge of a wall or around a corner. It also seems that at times you cannot hear someone charging if you're inside a building whilst they're on the outside. Yet you suddenly get stabbed in the chest by that same guy who's just flown in through the door at over 100 miles an hour. This all seems a bit random. Moving on, vaulting over walls and other obstacles is a large issue for competitive gameplay. The first part to this problem was really notable in Battlefield 3. Vaulting over obstacles made the hitboxes, well, non-existent at times, meaning it was literally impossible to kill an enemy as they were mid-vault, but they were still able to shoot you. The second part of the issue, which also has relevance to map design, is that not only are there so many areas to cover now, enemies can now vault over most of the walls in the map. This again is creating more unpredictability. There are so many walls and entrances, you cannot cover everything efficiently. This breaks up the flow and strategical positioning of the players, and you end up with chaotic gameplay. The last design flaw that I really dislike are the invisible walls. This is when your bullets will stop in midair because you are literally shooting a part of an in-game object that is invisible due to the way it's textured or modeled. I remember shouting fucking invisible walls while the casters were listening in on our voice comms at LAN because I couldn't shoot the enemy. A good player will try and utilize cover to his advantage. This means trying to take tight angles which allow you to shoot the enemy while showing as little of your body to them, increasing your chances of survival. The invisible walls prohibit this. From my personal experience, I believe that Battlefield 1 seems to have a lot more invisible walls than previous versions of the game. A good example would be when buildings are destroyed. There are clear gaps in the rubble that you can see through, however you can't shoot through them. There are even some cases when the enemy can actually shoot back at you. This again is adding more randomness and breaking the flow of gameplay. Aside from the game modes, maps, and mechanics, broadly speaking, for any game to be successful in eSport, it needs three or more things: a competitive fan base, sponsors, and a competitive player base. With a larger fan base comes more sponsors willing to invest money. With more money, you attract better teams and pro players who are willing to invest hours of their time into becoming the best at the game. The casual fanbase is huge. Over 3 million copies of Battlefield 1 have been sold. However, most of these have been for PlayStation and Xbox, with PC in the minority, which is bad news as the main competitive community is on PC. Furthermore, I can confidently say that the current competitive player base makes up for less than 2% of the entire Battlefield player base itself. Why should any developer devote resources to accommodate such a small minority of people who most of the time complain about the game or each other? There have been many times when the casual community have argued, why should we watch Battlefield competitive when it's infantry only? There's no vehicles, there are too few players. As mentioned previously, team sizes are much smaller. For LAN tournaments, it's not economically viable for organizations to sponsor larger teams, hence why, in previous iterations of the franchise, the only tournaments available were for smaller infantry-only gameplay. Due to the large differences in team sizes, it has always created a very large disconnect between competitive gameplay and the more casual game. Another issue is that spectators not only want to watch top-level individual plays, but they want to see the pros playing the same game as they do. This is something that other big esport games have done very well. Take Dota 2, League of Legends, StarCraft, and Counter-Strike. Their inbuilt matchmaking system allows users to basically play the same game as the pros do in the big tournaments, allowing them to believe that maybe one day they could possibly be as good. Another issue is that the competitive community have always had to ban half the weapons and gadgets that are deemed overpowered or lack skill to use. This is an attempt to try and balance the gameplay, increase the skill ceiling, and reduce randomness. This all sounds great, however again, it further distances competitive gameplay from the normal gameplay. This re-emphasizes the fact that Battlefield 1 is just not built for competition. Aside from that, the game is difficult to watch. It appears very chaotic since players tend to die left and right, respawn, or constantly get revived all the time. This means spectating players in the first-person camera would never last very long, hence why casters would mostly stay in the tabletop map view. It was much easier to see how teams would position themselves and make offensive and defensive plays. But of course, the spectators wanted to watch the first-person view. They want to learn how the pros take angles, their peaks, and their duels. They want to see the sick aim, so to speak, and they especially love the clutch moments. There are many smaller details I could go into to explain why Battlefield 1 is not suited for competition, yet with these larger points alone, I believe my case is made. To quickly recap, the maps are not designed for competitive play. Some of the game design and mechanics hinder the flow of high-level gameplay, and there's too much unpredictability, which drives away potential good players and teams. In addition, there is too large a chasm between competitive gameplay and casual play, driving potential fans away. So we end up without having enough players and spectators, which means no sponsor for larger tournaments or prize pools. So can this game be played competitively? Sure, anything can, and good luck to the people trying. But can it actually be good? Not really. The only way it can will be if at its core the game is made for competition, but that's not just how the game is made. So that's pretty much the main points I've had to say about whether Battlefield can be a good competitive game. The casual game itself I think is great and much better than previous versions of Battlefield, and I've had a lot of fun. If you have any questions, please comment below, I'll try and answer them. If you agree with me, give a like and subscribe. So I'm gonna end it here. Thanks for listening.